it seems like, at the young age you chose to do law school, which is part of following your purpose. Um, but then, do you feel like you kind of, I mean, I don't know the correct term, but like you maybe dropping off or like stop being a lawyer for that bit of a time, was that part of the plan? Or was it just, you know, like, was it meant to take a pause?
It's an interesting story, actually. What ended up being my pause in lawyering. So when I decided to move to the West Coast, I was still working at a law firm that was filled with very miserable people, and I was becoming one of those miserable people. But my Buddhist practice actually woke me up in that aspect. That I was like, I don't have to stay here and be miserable and part of this. I control my destiny, So I set a goal and started chanting that I was going to get out of this rut. I didn't know how, but I just put that out there in the universe that I needed change and I needed shift. And the opportunity to check out Seattle came to me at that point in time. A very good friend had recently moved out here, and he was like, "Why don't you just come out and try it on?" And so, in the process of coming out here to try it on, I also reached out to other young women who were Buddhist practitioners. And immediately when I visited Seattle, I walked right into a community of other spiritual positive practitioners. And they were all doing activities and things to better their life. And so, when I came to try on Seattle, I was like, this is the thing. And then I talked to the Washington State Bar, and they're like, "Well, you haven't practiced law long enough to waive in. You're going to have to take the bar exam again." And I was like, "Boo! Like, I don't want to take another bar exam. It's really hard. It's a really hard test." But my friend at the time and a fellow, young women's leader in the Buddhist thing, she was like, "Well, just chant about it. Like, chant that you've already passed, and then the resources will come to you." That you need to pass. And sure enough, actually a colleague of mine, a Buddhist friend I had just met, she lent me a book to study with for the Washington Bar. I registered for the Washington Bar. One of my friends back home, his name's Jeff, he always tells the story of Angel sat at my apartment for one weekend, studied for the bar, and then went out to Washington and took it and passed. And I definitely did more than one weekend of study, but I didn't do months and months of study. It was, not much, honestly. And then I did go out to Seattle. I took the bar exam. And in that process, the law firm that I was working for, of course, they found out I had taken the bar exam. And meanwhile, I'm chanting. I have no idea how I'm going to move to Washington. I don't have a job out there. I haven't even passed the bar. Um, and that law firm finds out I took the bar exam in Washington because lawyers are always checking up on lawyers, like to make sure that we're ethical people. So when you fill out the application, they double check what all of your references and all of that good stuff to make sure that you're not lying about anything. So when the law firm found out I took the bar in a different state, they were totally pissed actually at me. They're like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm living my life. I'm gonna probably move to Washington." And they were like, "Okay, yeah, great. We'd like you to sign this. We're going to give you a severance package," which was a giant pot of money. And they're like, "We're not going to contest your unemployment, and you don't have to come back to work next week." And I was like, "Sweet." This is the best thing ever because I got to leave the miserable people. I got the giant pot of money I needed to move without a job, and I got unemployment from the state of Minnesota, which gave me time to look for something else in Washington. So my desire to transform no matter what and to move to this new place was totally fulfilled. And then I moved to Washington without a job, and I started interviewing for jobs in law firms, and I was always the top candidate multiple times. But when I get to that final interview and they told me what they were doing, my heart just sank. I was like, "Ew, I don't want to do that." And I couldn't lie to people and say that my heart was in it. And so I was going through the motions, but I was obviously not getting these jobs um, as litigators. So I was just not getting work. And I'm like, and it was about 4 months in, and I'm still, chanting and focusing on it and going, what's going on? And I started temping for a legal temp agency. and I was doing a lot of organizing for my Buddhist organization. And so one day I actually got fired from my legal temp job because they were like, "Oh, you keep taking too many breaks. You're on your phone too much." And that's because I kept going out to organize, because I was organizing this event for women, for world peace, to transform people, and kept taking breaks because we needed to plan the content and do all these things. And it was way more important to me than this temp job where I was reviewing documents about something really boring. And so my temp lead calls me and he's like, "Yeah, don't go back to such and such law firm today. They don't want you back. You keep taking too many breaks." And it's like, "Oh, that's a bummer. Oh well." He's like, "But this thing just opened up at Seattle Children's for a regulatory analyst. You're going to need the whole afternoon because it's a multi-interview process. So it's good. Just go to Children's and do this interview." And I'm like, "Okay, sounds great. Being a regulatory analyst sounds way better than, for a children's hospital, way better than anything I've interviewed for thus far." So I go to that job interview and it's going really well. I'm completely being myself and just being honest that I'm like, "Well, yeah, I haven't really done regulatory or anything healthcare related ever before, but this sounds great and I love the mission of what you guys are doing." And then the final phase of the interview, this woman starts asking all these questions about event planning and organizing, which I've done a ton of as a volunteer in my Buddhist practice and my fundraising for the different worldwide compassionate causes, because I've always been about how do we make the world a better place. And so I had this whole host of volunteer work that was a whole resume of project management and event planning that I'd never recognized about myself. But in this interview, this woman starts pulling these questions out of me because I told a story about problem solving or something. And then she's like, "Oh, so really?" And I'm like, "What on earth does event planning have to do with regulatory analysis?" But I just keep going with it. And at the end of the interview, she's like, "Well, I'd like to offer you a job starting yesterday as the project manager for our bioethics conference. We need somebody really bad, and you have all of the experience." And I was like, "Oh." She's like, "Would you consider, being a project manager instead of a regulatory analyst?" And I was like, "Sounds like a lot of fun. Sure." I was like, "But how much does it pay?" She's like, "We'll pay you the same." I'm like, "Great." I'm in. So that began my career as a project manager for a children's hospital, which lasted about 15 years, where they actually gave me all of the training I needed to get my PMP certification, my Scrum Master certification. We started actually a consulting and teaching through that job, where we were going to other research institutes and universities and teaching project management in a research healthcare context, which gave me the skills to be the professor for the University of Washington that I am today, teaching other people project management. So it was, it was really divine fate and synchronicity, and being in conversation with my higher self that allowed me to be in the space to get that opportunity. And I stayed in corporate for 15 years, in part because I was ready to, I think I was waiting to have all the training to really be able to launch and be in the right space. And when I did launch myself, I was ready and I was in the right space. So that's kind of the long story of how I feel like it was the right timing, because it gave me the long time being in, I'm forgetting the word, when a butterfly, they're a caterpillar and then they're in the cocoon.
Chrysalis.
Yeah.
Yeah, cocoon, yeah.
My chrysalis to launch as an attorney / spiritual guide. It was just about 15 years.
That is so cool. That's so cool, though. I mean, I'm sure there are attorneys, lawyers out there who need to hear the story, right? So I don't know. I don't have that experience, but from my point of view, looking in, doctor, lawyers, like all those professions that require so much training, the more you put in, the feeling, probably the sense of opportunity cost probably is higher. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are so many people who are stuck in the miserable, high respected jobs, not knowing that they can actually jump so much and do so many things and still perhaps still be able to do the lawyer, the doctor, what it is that they set out to be. So I'm glad I asked you about this. That is so cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess thank God that you know did already have a practice and was able to maintain it throughout school and throughout your work. And I'm so impressed that somebody with who has to spend so much time, like so long, such with such a long education, putting so much work in the mental fields, and yet
Mm.
you're able to um, focus on your mission, like care more about the mission and the people, focus on compassion. All that is really cool. All that is really cool, and thank you for sharing your story.